guys, it's Eric here at Farpoint Farms. Tonight, I want to go over 3 reasons why you should get a shortwave radio. And the number one reason I would recommend a shortwave radio for you is that it's a cool hobby to have. Shortwave transmits a lot farther, and when the weather conditions, and by weather I mean space weather, the way the sun acts and interferes or interacts with our atmosphere greatly changes the range and location that we can pick up these signals. Shortwave can travel all the way around the world. Now, while no one station broadcasts worldwide, it's pretty incredible some of the stations that I have been able to receive over the years, and that's the part of the hobby for me that makes this fun. I can take a radio like this on a vacation, which I did last year, and listen to stations from all over South America. The area I was in was just, I could pick up so many South American stations. And while I don't speak all the languages that I was able to listen to, some of the music and some of the stuff that I was able to get to, sometimes those stations are still broadcasting in English. And music is universal. It doesn't matter what the voice is saying. It's just, if a song is pleasant, it's pleasant. So I really enjoy shortwave for that, and I think that's probably the coolest part of it. Now, we used to have these ways, they're called QSL cards, and so you would contact the station that you heard, and you'd be like, hey, I'm in North Carolina, and I heard your station down in Bogota or something, and they would send you a QSO card saying, yeah, look at the station here, WXYZ, and when you heard it. And that would be kind of a cool thing. There are a few stations that still do that, most don't. But it's really, for me anyway, I'm not about collecting the cards, although I think I have a few. Yeah, I have one from Ted Randall up there on the shelf behind me there. But for me, it's more about just for my own personal, like, wow, that was cool. I've picked up North Korean radio. I've certainly picked up plenty of radio from Radio China. I've picked up, before they went out, the BBC radio. Of course, Voice of America is all over the place out there. And so those are really cool to be able to pick up the big stations, but also some really faint stations that may not show up on any database, And there's also shortwave pirates, which are fun to listen to. I love to listen and play with Part 15 radio, which is as close to pirate radio as I'll ever get. And so to be able to hear some pirate radio from overseas or from down south is really kind of a cool thing for me. So that's the first reason why I would want to do it. It's just the ability to tune into stations from all over the place. The second reason is the variety of content. And a lot of people that I hear online when I make videos on shortwave radios talk about how all they can pick up are religious broadcasts. And to some extent, that's true. There's been some ongoing discussion on one of the forums that I follow about, are there any shortwave stations here in America that don't broadcast religious information? And the answer, as far as I've been able to tell, is no. But there's a reason for that, and the reason is that it pays the bills. The modern shortwave radio stations here in America, they are using a really cool setup. Like you can pay to be on their stations, and so you can reach a huge audience that is not available on the internet with a shortwave program of your own. One of the most interesting ones out there for me to listen to is Voice of the Week. And he has a YouTube channel. He usually reviews, I think, fast food. And while that's not interesting to me, I like the fact that he is putting his voice all around the world. He broadcasts overseas as well. And he has his own, you could call it a podcast. I'm calling it a radio show because that's what it is. But the Voice of the Week is out there, and he is on there every night. And it's or not every night, but a couple times a month. And he's an interesting character to listen to. It's a unique piece of radio content that you won't find anywhere else. So the second reason, I guess, is that it's the variety. While a station might play 8-hour blocks of Christian or other religious content, that's to keep the lights on and keep the transmitters humming. You and I can go out there and purchase airtime and have our own shows. And honestly, there are some great shows. You just have to kind of poke around and know when to tune in. And I think that also gives the shortwave bands kind of a unique perspective. I don't know of many, there are a few, but I don't know of many stations here in the United States, AM or FM, that have that type of a setup where you can buy airtime. And that is a huge deal. I mean, it really is. There is one or two that I can think of off the top of my head, but not too many of them. Where on shortwave, I broadcast on WBCQ. I have 50,000 watts of power going out, and it was able to reach halfway across the U.S., well up into Canada, well down into South America. out into the Bermuda Triangle, the Bahamas and such. We were able to pick that signal up all over the place. I got reports from folks all over the place, and some into Europe, although that wasn't the direction that it was really aiming for. So it's pretty incredible to me that you're able to send that signal out for a very reasonable price. So the stuff you hear might be there one month and not the next. That's a little bit sad when a station, or not a station, but a show that you love kind of disappears. But I do love the fact that people are still out there doing that stuff, and I think it's part of the awesome mystique of shortwave. So that's the second reason. The third reason kind of dovetails into that, and it's also probably the most important reason, and it's free speech. And I know a lot of people get offended nowadays when they hear the word free speech, but that's not the way we're supposed to be as a nation, and it's certainly not the way it's supposed to be as a world. You want to be able to get a message across, and you want it to be able to get out to the largest audience as possible. Shortwave is the way to go. Borders don't stop a radio signal. And so for people living in areas that are oppressed, it's a way to get information to those people that bypasses any and all censorship that that country may have. And I think that that's such an important tool to have to help keep people in an area that may not be allowed to hear everything they want to hear informed. And I think that's probably it's one of the main reasons why even in our country back in World War II, shortwave was kind of looked down upon a little bit by our own government, as far as we don't really want people hearing what's coming in. We don't want propaganda from Germany. We don't want propaganda from Japan coming into the United States. They didn't ban shortwave radios, but they kind of dissuaded the idea of manufacturers producing and selling shortwave radios during the time frame of World War II. I don't disagree with that or agree with that. I understand, countries do what they have to do in times of war. But it is interesting to me that that was one of the things that they were concerned about. And other countries right now are concerned about the same stuff. North Korea keeps a very, very tight lid on the information that its population is able to receive. And they do some jamming to try to keep signals from coming into North Korea, but that doesn't always work. So there are the people who are able to hear the other side of the story in North Korea, and I think that that is probably the best part about shortwave radio. And let's be honest, if we can, here in the United States, and as well as in Europe, there are other types of censorship currently going on. Shortwave is a way to bypass those types of censorship. There's a gentleman who broadcasts nightly for an hour, I think, maybe an hour and a half, on almost every station in America. This guy is not on any AM or FM stations. He has a very limited internet presence. He certainly doesn't have any social media presence. And he has actually spent time in jail for his opinions, although, again, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with anything anybody's saying on shortwave. I'm just saying that here is a guy who has literally been squashed like a bug, but he's still able to get his voice out all over our nation and into other nations just by using shortwave radio. And I think it's important for anyone that ever has felt the sting of being maybe banned in a Facebook comment or taken offline for any reason. I know there's a lot of that stuff that goes on. It's kind of sad that we live in a country that's First Amendment is all about free speech, but we don't actually have it anymore and no one seems to care. But shortwave, I guess, gives us the opportunity to get it back for a little while anyway. So those are the top 3 reasons why I think you should have a shortwave radio. The ability to use it as a hobby, to figure out what are those little stations that I only heard once on this frequency at this time, and I wrote it down because it was so cool. And what about those bigger signals that are all around the U.S. and the idea that perhaps I could broadcast on shortwave myself, going through one of these big stations, 100,000 watt transmitters, and broadcast all over the United States to fans of shortwave radio or fans of the kind of content that I want to produce. And lastly, the idea that free speech is still free speech, and we have the right to hear and listen to what we want to hear and to say what we want to say. Shortwave still affords us that opportunity. So those are the top 3 reasons why I think you should have a shortwave radio here in 2025, 24. And I think that there are probably 100 other great reasons to own a shortwave radio, but it's a hobby that I've been into for a very long time, ever since before I was even a teenager. And it's a hobby you can get into cheap. Like I said, for just some of the more powerful stations, you can start off with something that costs less than $10 if you can find one at a flea market or Goodwill. Go on to eBay and you can get yourself something like this that's full featured, and you might get a great deal on it and pay less than $50 or something like that. You can move up into something like this and pick up nearly everything that's out there, and a pretty sensitive receiver for right around $100. Or you can go all in and get something like an Eton or a Chaoyang LC90 here and get internet radio with this particular radio, or a very, very sensitive receiver with the LC90 that has every bell and whistle you can think of. I've got a whole series of videos on shortwave as well as other forms of radio, so if you're interested in that sort of stuff, perhaps you've come to the right channel and you should subscribe. And for the rest of you, I'll see you next time. Take care.